the Omega Metroid podcast. My name is Andy Spiteri, joined as always by Dakota Lasky. Dak, how are you doing on this fine Tuesday?
Doing pretty well, Andy. Doing pretty well. Had a 3-day weekend and didn't do much with it, but I had some. I don't know. I cooked a little bit. You know, trying to still cook as much as I can at home. Trying some new recipes out, and had a bunch of apple cider, which is good because it is the season. I think we had some Halloween movies going around the apartment a little bit beforehand. And
which Halloween movies? That's important.
So the one with the jeez, I'm so bad at the names. The one with the three witches is a Halloween Town.
Hocus Pocus?
Hocus Pocus, that's what it's called. Yeah, Hocus Pocus. I think we also watched Halloween Town. And then there was another movie that my roommate was watching. I can't remember the name of it either, but I'm not a big fan of scary movies, but I like getting in the Halloween spirit, but I usually don't stick around to watch scary stuff. Not that stuff I listed is any particularly scary. Like Hocus Pocus isn't scary, but you know. Right. But yeah, getting in the season a little bit and all that, trying to hang in there. But yeah, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm recording from a different location than I usually am. My basement is undergoing some maintenance right now that I was kind of alluding to before we started recording. So I don't know if I'm going to sound any different or not, but if I do, that's why, and I'm sorry. But yeah, I can't complain. A 3-day weekend this week as well. And as a side note, Sam and I have also been watching scary stuff, and we started watching American Horror Story, and I was really excited for that, and I was really disappointed because I thought that it kind of sucked, actually, which is too bad because I kept on hearing how good it was.
I remember the first season being. How much of it did you watch? Because I remember the first season being pretty okay, I think.
We watched the first 2 seasons, which I think are generally regarded as the best 2 seasons. And it was okay, but it went on for way too long. It was a little bit too hokey, I think, for me. I kind of like more of like the realistic, scary stuff, like psychological horror. And there's like, I don't know, too many ghosts or stuff like that. There was like every gimmick under the sun in season 2. You had devil possession, you had zombies, you had aliens, there's just like tons of stuff. So yeah, I don't know. That was my dive into the Halloween scary stuff so far this year.
Yeah, I think we have a carved pumpkin in my apartment right now, which one of my roommates did, and also had some pumpkin seeds as well from that, which were really good. So love that.
There you go. All right. Well, one thing that is more of a trick than a treat, unfortunately, is that Axiom Verge 2 has officially been delayed. Of course, we are big fans of Axiom Verge over on this show. I think it's one of the best Metroidvania games that there is. The teaser was released at a Nintendo Indie Direct seemingly forever ago, saying that it would release in fall of 2020. And then, of course, 2020 actually happened, and nothing has really gone as planned. So not really a big surprise to see that this is falling back into 2021. Over on his blog, Tom Happ said that he didn't want to give a definitive date, but he is hoping that the game can come out in the first half of the year. So that's a little bit of a bummer, but I mean, like the old saying goes, take your time, make the great game. A bad game is bad forever, but a delayed game is good eventually, right?
Yeah, that's true. I don't even think that's true these days. A bad game can eventually be good, but a delayed game usually, I feel like, ends up being better most of the time. Like, there was that Final Fantasy game, Final Fantasy 14. That's pretty good now. Everyone hated it on release. Now it's pretty good. No Man's Sky. Everyone hated that game on release. Now some people play it, but I think the delay is, considering everything, probably for the best. And I'm looking forward to some positive news when we get closer to the actual release date, which hopefully is not too far away.
Yeah, you know what? That's very true, actually. A bad game can be a good game now.
Yeah.
Which is, like I guess maybe it's time to update the quote.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Like, back then when the quote was said, that was probably true. But nowadays, when games can and are patched years and years after they've come out, and multiple times after release, a lot of the time at release, I don't think that's necessarily true anymore. But at the same time, I do think it's important to make a good first impression.
I was just
So,
gonna say that. Yeah,
there
it's
are.
that's another saying that you can never make a second first impression. So
That's
that
true.
one is true.
Yeah, and I was also thinking along the lines of other things that have happened recently. By the time this episode comes out for release for everyone to listen to, the new Smash update will be out because Minecraft Steve and Alex and all of them come out tonight, which means there will be a patch which might include Ridley buffs, which I'd be very excited about and is tangentially related to the topics on this podcast, so I can bring it up. And I am looking forward to that. But yeah, we talked about Minecraft Steve, I think last episode. Comes out tonight. So by the time this episode's out, he'll already be out. Looking forward to giving that dude a try. And I also think, I don't know unless you have any other comments on that. The only other thing that happened recently I can think of is people talking about like there's a storyboard artist being hired by Retro, and that was on a few news articles recently on my timeline. So that's the only other thing I could think of. We're still so starved for news that the job like the job postings are such a big deal every single time, but they get these sites clicks, so I don't blame them.
Yeah, I mean, you said it right. Like, it's just that there's nothing else to report about with Metroid Prime 4, or really with Metroid at all. So like, any news is, we're latching on to anything. I saw that too. I didn't really think much of it. I'm sure that I'm sure Super Metroid probably had some kind of story port
I think every Metroid
in
game
it.
has had, I mean,
Yeah.
maybe other than the first two, but even those, I would assume, had some kind of equivalent to a
At
storyboard or
least
all
with
that.
the cutscenes, right?
You're
Like,
right, yeah.
yeah, and I mean, I know for sure that Metroid Prime did. So,
It absolutely
I
did.
mean, it's news, I guess, but it's not breaking news. That's kind of like saying that a movie production hired someone to take out the trash or something like that. It's just like these are jobs that are fundamental to the production of your game or your movie or whatever. But I mean, at the same time, that's cool. It just goes to show that the production is still moving along, and yeah, hopefully, mercifully, maybe sometime soon we will get some kind of teaser or something, an acknowledgement. I don't know.
I hope so. I just thought it was very funny how that like news quote unquote came out and people were like Metroid Prime 4 is going to be more story based and cinematic and narrative. Like every game has storyboards. It doesn't mean that like any that the game is going to be more or less story driven or not. So
Right.
the conclusions that people come to are very entertaining. It does in and of itself keep me going through this drought and these hard times. As does, by the way, I forgot to mention this when I brought up Smash, but I tweeted out if Ridley gets buffed in this patch, the upcoming one with the Minecraft Steve update, I'll PayPal everyone who retweets this $5. I currently owe $18,610 if Ridley
All
gets
right.
if Ridley gets buffed tonight. So if I'm not here
Add
next week,
$5 onto that, buddy.
yeah, if I'm not here next week, I've left the country because I do not have $18,610 right now. At least
I'll
not
tell
that
you
I can
what.
access.
If you got to flee the country, you can make your way to Calgary. I'll give you a place to stay.
Oh well, thank you. I'm sure wherever I end up, I can still do the show. Audacity and some kind of computer will be accessible to me. I'm sure, but yeah,
You
that's
know,
been fun.
you brought up something, and I wanted to add to this before we finally get going with today's show. But tell me if you agree with this. I feel like since the announcement of Hyrule Warriors: Age of Calamity, at least in my circle, the pressure has really come off of like you just saw like so many Nintendo Direct rumors like it's going to be this week, it's going to be this week, it's going to be this week. I feel like since the announcement of that has really dissipated and really died down. Like now that Nintendo fans have like something to look forward to, I feel like that pressure has been alleviated a little bit. Have you noticed that at all?
Yeah, I definitely have. I think it's because the Age of Calamity stuff is just really compelling. Like everyone's really invested in it. Like everyone's interested in once the new information drops and all of that. And I think we've had a little bit of Pikmin hype as well. But I think all of that's going to go away the second those games drop. Just it is kind of a situation where people also have like recent Sony and Xbox announcements as well. So they're also kind of chewing on that a little bit. But yeah, I have noticed that people are kind of backed off a little bit. I think also there's a mix of like acceptance, like it's been the year and we've had like how many partner directs, right? And we already kind of know
Yeah,
like there's nothing really coming. Like we've been told by insiders like there's nothing really coming after this, etc. So it's kind of like all right, like the energy has been lost, right? Like there's only so much, so many times you can bang the drum, and at the same time, yeah, I think Age of Calamity looks really hype. At least for me, I'm excited because every time I see some Age of Calamity stuff, I'm like, wow, look, it's the plot I was looking for from Breath of the
yes,
Wild. I actually think it's kind of funny how it's almost like overcompensating for how little plot Breath of the Wild had. That like all of the marketing I've it's like so many characters and plot. I'm like, wow, there's like so much stuff to like get into, and there's so much stuff that's gonna happen in this game. Like I'm excited for that because plot wise, like nothing happened in Breath of the Wild. So like that overcompensating is both funny and satisfying and relieving because I'm excited to get into the story that was essentially like teased
a
in
second
the
thought.
first, yeah, a second thought, if you will,
Yeah,
yeah. And that's why I think, again, Nintendo's kind of getting a little bit of that lenience because that like Age of Calamity stuff is really hitting what a lot of people want. Like it's hitting the mark of what people are looking for, and it looks really sick. And it looks like a lot of fun. I don't think I've ever wanted to play like a Dynasty Warriors game ever, and I'm like, I gotta pick this up. Like I gotta see what happens. So I think that's a lot of it, and it looks hyped. So Nintendo is at the moment doing well, but I'm sure once that game gets released and after that, I think some people will remember like, oh wait, now what's next?
nothing
Like
again. Yeah.
what's happening?
Yep, I agree. And that's cool that you noticed it as well. Let's get going on today's episode. I'm excited to talk about this again. Originally, I promised everyone last week that we were going to do an Inspired by Metroid episode this week, but we are going to delay that by 1 week because, frankly, the game took longer than I remembered that it took. So I haven't finished it, Dak hasn't finished it, and we want to do the game justice. And, kind of like that old delay saying goes, better to do it right than do it fast. So, in the meantime, we're going to go back and cover more of the cut content from the Metroid Prime games, which I think like people were really really into, and which is like really cool to see. Again, I will post the link to all of the cut content in the show note description. So make sure that you're clicking on that and follow along if you can to view some of these images. But yeah, there was a really great response to this, so I'm excited to dive back and talk about some of the other cut concepts from this game.
Absolutely. This I think everyone loved going into the cut content. This is something that as a topic overall in game development, I love, and I'm so glad that there's more of it and it wasn't just for the first game. And I figured, yeah, why not? Let's just like tackle it all. We're already right here, and I feel like it'd be a shame to kind of leave it on the back burner for a little bit when there's a lot of stuff we can chew into. And that other game, yeah, we still got to finish it. I didn't get around to going through it. I want to give it like an actual like good play and not just like get through it and anything and rush it or anything like that. So I'm glad we're going back to this, and yeah, we're gonna go back to Mama Robotnik's
Mama
NeoGaf post,
Robotnik.
yes, Volume 2. So this one's actually we actually have a little bit on an apparent Metroid 2 remake that Retro Studios was going to apparently do, and then also Metroid Prime 1.5, which was a Metroid Prime 2 pitch before they actually went along and developed and published Echoes. So it's a little bit of here and there. It's a bit of Prime. It's mostly Prime, but also a little bit of Metroid 2 remake. So a little bit of 2D, a little bit of 3D here. But yeah, Volume 2 of Mama Robotnik's cut content, Metroid cut content threads, Metroid Prime 1.5, and the Metroid 2 remake. So we'll get into that, and if we can get to the other ones too, I mean, we'll try. If not, that'll be for
I
another
think that
episode.
I think we can get to Metroid Prime 2 today. I think maybe I shouldn't make promises, but we'll try our best. And shout out to the goat Mama Robotnik for
Mama
putting
Robotnik.
this all together
Wherever you are.
over on NeoGaf. Yeah, shout out to you. Okay, so yeah, I mean, let's take it away. Metroid 2, the remake, which was allegedly being worked on by Retro Studios. I have to say, I don't know if I believe that, to be honest.
So
Um,
yeah, looking through this, like the most of this thread is on Metroid Prime 1.5 and not Metroid 2 remake. So you can
yeah,
if you open up the thread, like the first thing you see is actually from another Metroid 2 remake, which I guess when this thread was being made, like that game was still in development, right? Obviously now it's been out for a while. So but you can see a little bit of it there. But it seems like Mama Robotnik did digging and found evidence of what seemed like a potential idea of doing a Metroid remake within these like blogs from members of Retro Studios and things that they had written down on this site and some other like things they had gotten from resumes and whatnot. So it seems like it's more just conjecture than and speculation than actual like the Metroid
Yeah.
Prime cut content stuff. That was like pretty tangible, right? Like this stuff, it seems it was more of an idea that never really got too far.
Yeah, totally. I think that, like, I could totally believe that in a boardroom meeting or maybe a conference call with Nintendo, somebody maybe pitched the idea and said, like, hey, what about for the next Metroid Prime game if you remade Metroid Prime or Metroid 2? I could see that, but I think that's probably all that it was. It was just an idea that was floated out and then maybe batting it down because they wanted to focus on a new property. I think that, like, any serious Metroid 2 remake discussions would have probably been handled by the team that did Zero Mission, which is coming out around the same time as Metroid Prime 2, anyways. So I think that if that would have happened, it would have been handled by the same team. Maybe could have released around the same time as Metroid Prime 3. That timing seems to make sense to me. But yeah, I mean, I think it's obvious that Retro wasn't the team that should have been handling this remake. Which is fine because they obviously went on to create their own fantastic Metroid Prime games.
For sure. And even with like another spin-off like Hunters, they were still only like somewhat involved in that, right? So they were really their main focus were the main Prime games, which is fine, yeah. And it would have been cool though, like alongside Prime 3 to have this almost come out like how Fusion came out alongside the original Metroid Prime, which would have been cool. So if you're
Right.
following along with us on the thread, there are a couple quotes from Ben Sprout's comments. He was a Retro Studios artist, and it seems like there were some comments from a blog or a website they were posting on. If I click into that, it seems like it was a WordPress blog, and it's really just like his own personal blog. Him saying like it would have been cool to do a remake. It was discussed at Retro, but nothing really came of it, and that's just on his personal blog. But thought it would be cool to do the remake. There's also a texture. Well, there's the if you listen to our last episode and follow that thread, you'll recognize this Omega Metroid concept art. But that was more related to Metroid Prime. But below that, there seems like there's a morph ball track from Mr. Sprout's texture portfolio. So Ben Sprout, it seems like they were doing some kind of texture work for what looks like could have been a 2D game, and this seems like it could have been a texture from, I don't know, something in that. And then we have his resume, which doesn't really show us too much, and then really just mostly speculation of where this, I guess,
Right.
idea would have ended up. This could have maybe been somewhat related to Metroid Dread, which is everyone. If you're listening to this show, you should know what Metroid Dread
You
is,
know what
right? I
Metroid
feel
Dread
like you know
is.
what it is, and maybe that could have been like the working title for the remake at one point, like at its very very early like development like idea stage. Like that's maybe what they could have called it, and it got like kind of put together and
Right.
whatnot. But even in this like post here, it seems like it never resulted in an actual game. There's no proof of it really going far into development or any like real resources coming from it. So it's really just mostly conjecture based on this like one artist's like talk and whatnot. So there's really, I would say there's, based on this, unfortunately, it doesn't seem like there's much there.
And yeah, and I mean, like, I'm sure he's not lying. I mean,
Oh,
I'm
for
like I
sure.
said, I could totally see someone pitching like, hey, maybe we should remake Metroid 2. Especially if they already knew that they were going to do Zero Mission at the time. Yeah, I mean, I just think that it was probably decided that Retro wasn't the studio, or I mean, maybe, and this is me speculating, like maybe they did pitch a remake of Metroid 2, and it's like, you know what, if you're gonna do a 2D side scroller, do Donkey Kong Country instead, because we haven't had one of those in forever, which I could also maybe see being possible. So it's cool to think about what if, but I mean I think I was pretty happy with the remake that Mercury Steam gave us. I thought it was a really good bridge between the old and the new. But yeah, I mean it's cool to think about what if and maybe what elements in the Donkey Kong Country Returns games kind of incorporated some ideas maybe they had, or maybe it didn't even get that far. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't think it did. But what did get somewhat far is right below this, the quote unquote Metroid 1.5, Prime 1.5 design concept and pitch, where it seems like Retro Studios was going in a somewhat completely different direction than what we ended up actually getting in Echoes. And this will be like the big meat and potatoes of this actual episode because there's nothing really left for the undone Retro Studios Metroid 2 remake. But there's a good amount for Metroid 1.5. And this, at least as a Metroid fan, this is something that I've read about on the internet over the years and something I've always been interested in. It's like this kind of this meta lore to the franchise of like this game that never was, but it seemed like it had a lot of its own identity and character and a lot of concept art for it and a whole design document and a lot going on that is similar but almost entirely different than what we ended up actually getting from Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. But this is actually what really motivated me to get you to do these episodes with me, right? Like I wanted to do this, the Metroid Prime 1.5 remake, like design document, like cut content, whatever you want to call it, like the pitch for this game. I wanted to talk about this for a while because this is something that's always interested me. And as turns out, there's all these threads and all this other content and unmade Metroid stuff. But this was what really got me into this and what made me want to read into it more. So, Andy, do you just go before we go into this though? Like before, like I had mentioned this or you'd seen the thread. Like, did you know about this? Like, had you read about it? Had you had any interest in it? If you did, like, did you know what?
So, I mean, I definitely say that I was yeah, like I'm interested definitely in a lot of stuff that like Metroid concept art and stuff like that. And looking at a lot of this stuff, I had seen a lot of the art before, but especially with Metroid Prime 1.5, I had never heard of it ever until we got to this. And actually, so I was kind of telling you before we got on the air. Um, to me, I remember back in the day, like around this time, 2002, 4, X, like that kind of time period. There was a lot of talk of 1.5 games being made, but like I'll use Halo as an example. I kept on hearing that they were going to make Halo 1.5, and the only difference would be is that it was like online play included, which I think was a consideration by Bungie back in the day. I remember one of their developers said, something along the lines of like, yeah, we could have done that and sold a bunch of copies, but we wanted to pour everything into Halo 2 instead. So in my mind, I'm looking at Metroid Prime 1.5. That my initial reaction when I first saw this was like, did they try and release Metroid Prime with like a multiplayer, kind of like Metroid Prime 2, where like you could play online? Because the Nintendo GameCube like had no online games, and it seemed kind of bizarre to me that they would consider doing that, especially because the multiplayer in Prime 2 is kind of lackluster. So yeah, I came into this like completely kind of blind, not really knowing what the heck Metroid Prime 1.5 was. To be frank, I still don't like. I'm still looking at this and I'm still kind of pouring through this. I'm like, man, this is cool, but like, yeah, I'm still there's still some mystery around that for me.
Right, and there is a lot to dig into. There's a lot of concept art, but there's a lot of writing and text. There's a whole design document which you can't really like zoom into very well on the image, but you could pull it up like otherwise in the link there and read through all that and scroll through all that information. And quickly glancing at it, there's a lot of like just individual ideas, like new enemy types, a new melee attack they were considering for Metroid Prime, which we really don't see like Samus getting a melee attack at all until like the game that must not be named, and then Samus Returns. So it would also involve a big ship. So that Metroid developers always want to go right to that big ship, like, oh, something happening on a ship. But yeah, this would have involved Samus fighting these AIs that have all these different personalities on this ship, while there's also a alien race that is aboard the ship and are in like a cryo sleep. And I'm assuming that these are like going to be activated at some point, and Samus takes them on. She also takes on things like on the ship, like drones and robotic stuff, and the AI themselves, while those like the race of aliens are being like constructed for war and all of that. So it seems like she finds some kind of vessel that comes like she comes upon a vessel like at the beginning of Metroid Prime, right? Like there's an SOS, like a distress signal coming from a ship. She goes to check it out. She goes and checks it out, and this would happen right after Metroid Prime. She goes and checks it out. She gets sucked in by like a tractor beam and then has to figure out what's going on this ship. and fight on it. Apparently, there might have even been other bounty hunters being pulled to the ship as well, kind of like Metroid. That might have been what ended up, Metroid Prime Hunters kind of does the same similar thing, brings in all these hunters to one place to use them for some sort. And it seems like that was an idea for here as well. She'd be able to destroy engines on the ship and destroy all the life forms on the ship and fight the AI. And apparently she would be limited. This is an idea you might like from your Metroid 5 pitch, that she'd have all of her stuff from Metroid Prime, but she'd be limited in how she'd use them in other areas. That's a little other ME2. There'd be all these different areas on the ship, like hangar bays, science bays, cryo chamber halls. Some of this stuff kind of feels like Metroid Fusion in a way, taking from that a little bit.
Kind of, yeah.
A little bit, yeah.
The thing that stuck out to me, there was two things that stuck out to me. And the first is that you mentioned it with all the other bounty hunters kind of gathering into one place. I was like, I wonder if this concept kind of became Metroid Prime Hunters, because it's sort of along the same lines. The other thing that stuck out to me, and I don't know why, but there's a line that specifically says Samus decides to take a long rest in her cryo chamber as her ship autopilots home. And this just reminded me again so much of like Aliens and like Prometheus and just like the Alien franchise, where obviously we know that Metroid takes a lot of its inspiration from Alien, but that was like, I don't know why it stuck out to me as much as it did, but that's such an Alien thing to do, that it's so on the nose, that I was kind of glad that they scrapped that, because I was like, it's one thing to take inspiration from, and it's another thing to like basically replicate the first half an hour of Alien Covenant or whatever. So I was okay with that being out. But I think like using or reading a lot of like this kind of summary of what the backstory would be, like it sounds very much to me like a lot of this kind of got morphed and twisted into what we know as Metroid Prime Hunters.
Yeah, very little. I think like kind of like the base general idea gets reworked in
Right,
Hunters.
yeah.
Yeah. But like some of this stuff also gets kind of like crazy. Like Samus is fighting in different parts of the ship that are like changed because of the rogue AI she's fighting. So she could be in like parallel dimensions, which obviously is used in Echoes. Some floors of the ship may like not have gravity, or gravity would be reversed, or time would run backwards.
I love that.
There would be like water moving up a faucet rather than down and stuff like that, like crazy stuff like that. And then like things like scan based puzzles, like more than just like using your visors to scan logs or an enemy or something like that, or to shut down something. There might be a scan to control a robot, or an X-ray visor puzzle to access areas and stuff like that, and doing similar to what Metroid Prime, but a little bit more. But yeah, the actual concept gets a little crazier, and that goes into the main like draw, which are the main AIs, like the rogue AIs that have 4 different personalities. And if you go into it, you'll see there's one called the Killer, the Child, the Mother, and the Martyr, and they have these like theater mask looking faces that there's a bunch of concept art for. If you scroll down, you'll see they're color coded and named on this thread. And this seems to me like very not un-Metroidy, but this one I was very like, I don't know how this would have like worked in game, like having these different personality AIs. I guess like the main thing is that each one of the AIs would have like a different like gameplay feature, right? And you'd fight them differently. Like the Child, like like gets scared by stuff or whatever, but like lashes out. And I don't know, like this was the one that always interests me, because the AIs look kind of creepy, like when you scroll down, right? And I don't know, what do you think about these?
I mean, first of all, they look very creepy, very creepy,
very creepy.
To me, I'll start with just the names. The impression that I get when I hear those names is like, this is much more Vania than Metroid. Like the names they're almost biblical to me, which isn't a bad thing, but it does seem like kind of a left turn for Metroid. But I mean, I think that the idea could have been cool, right? Like I always like the idea of like you give your bosses in the game kind of a personality, or like there's a reason that you're hunting them specifically. They don't happen to just be the monster that guards the area of the game that you're in. So I like that. Um, I like, I mean, I think the idea could have been cool, especially if they're kind of rogue AIs and like they can they can control elements of the ship. So it's like you are battling this AI, but you're battling the ship more
Mm-hmm.
so than that. Like they could do all sorts of crazy things. You kind of mentioned that the gravity could change and stuff like that. I think that would be like really wicked, and I think I pitched that actually for Metroid Prime or for Metroid 5. So I think that that sounds really cool. I mean, you're right. It does kind of sound. It doesn't sound Metroidy when you say it, and when you look at some of the images that are down here. Like they look, they definitely look creepy, but they don't look like something that we've seen in Metroid before. And you know what? That's not necessarily a bad thing. We got Metroid Prime with the last time that we stepped out of our comfort zone in Metroid,
Mm-hmm.
but it does look very. It looks more Vania than Metroid, I guess, is what I'll leave it as.
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of inspiration from other games and movies coming from these. If you read into it, you can see how like the killer is kind of based on like Hannibal, Hannibal from like the movie Hannibal, right? Or like
Yeah,
a Clockwork Orange. The child is like a character that's more like puzzle heavy. Like the mother AI would be kind of like Eve from Command and Conquer, it says, and would be potentially like a helper AI. So yeah, I don't know. These like very personality, like these are. It's not like Adam who literally just felt like a human personality in like on a
right.
computer, right? These are like these very stylized and dramatic concepts here. And scrolling down, they're pretty wild. But I would be interested to see how that would look. Like Samus taking on these AIs that like have these humanish but not really personalities to them, and this like crazy, like it would definitely be creepy. Like a lot of these vibes when I read this like gives me like a horror game kind of vibe. Like she's gonna be facing off against these like crazy looking things in like a dark ship that's like been, I don't know, like repurposing other alien species for these crazy things that's happening on the ship. Like it seems like they were creating like a horror game here rather than just like a dark kind of game. Because I wouldn't say Echoes is like a dark game in terms of like it being scary. It's dark like literally. So, but
You know
yeah.
what? Now that you say it, this kind of like reminds me more of what you would see in Dead Space
Mm-hmm.
than in Metroid. So I like the idea of, like I said, of fighting the AIs, but I don't love the idea of them assuming like a form. I think that it's much scarier when like you're fighting the environment.
Yeah.
I was talking about American Horror Story at the start of the show, and like the creepy thing about that is like for the first season especially, it's like that house is a character and it's scarier because it's a character that you are trapped inside of, not because it manifests in front of you and you can see it. I mean, sometimes it does, but I think that that would have been the way to go. But I mean, that being said, like I do think that all the models look really cool, except for the child. Actually, I'm not really big on the child. I think he kind of looks like one of those troll dolls from back in the day, except skinny. But yeah, I mean, I think that the concept could have been cool if it was elaborated a little bit more on, and especially there's this weird kind of it looks like a space pirate mixed with a xenomorph from Alien right
Oh,
below
right
that,
below.
which
Oh, the Hue Metroid. I think this
yeah,
thing looks so cool.
it
Like,
does. It looks very very cool. Like it maybe if like and I know that I'm just like completely ripping off Alien at this point, but maybe if one of these things is like stalking you around, almost like SAX was, that could have been very cool and drive up the fear. I mean, I guess we have seen that before, but I feel like this enemy just looks so intimidating and so scary that that would be like a good use of them.
yeah, and it looks like the Metroid would like detach from it and be able to fight separately from the humanoid. Like I love this. This is one of the artwork that's always stuck out to me because I always thought this was like so indicative of like these wild ideas that they were trying out after Metroid Prime. But also like I could see this as an enemy like absolutely in game, and yeah, absolutely looks really threatening and dangerous. Right below that too is another enemy called a Thrash Hunter, which is some kind of space pirate, like unknown alien form hybrid, which again has that like Dead Spacey feel to it almost kind of looks like a flood form as well a little bit with a space pirate. And below that is a shock beast, which is a similarly I think another space pirate alien hybrid to it. And this is looks pretty. This is something that kind of looks a lot like the if you remember the Metroid Prime cut concept art where they had like those organic weapons and like the spinal, like, Gatling gun thing. Like it kind of looks like a lot like that artwork, and I think they were trying that again, like that kind of style. Like maybe they couldn't do that kind of space pirate Metroid Prime, but they'd be able to do it by doing these space pirate alien hybrids in this game. I think these look really badass and really scary.
Yeah, totally. Um, yeah, and I guess just to clarify, I was talking about the troll child like way down at the bottom there. So I skipped ahead a little bit, but I was
Oh,
just giving
okay.
you my thoughts of
Oh
him.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah, I think that these all look really cool. I actually just love seeing concept art of weaponry in general. I think that it's just like super interesting that that level of detail goes in. So I think that that looks just super cool. The concept art. Maybe I'll go back on what I said actually, because the concept art of the child, where it's just the drawings, that actually looks kind of cool. The not so much the troll, but this one here looks definitely pretty cool, and I mean all of them kind of do. And then there's one image here, and this Hugh Metroid thing. It strikes me as it looks kind of like the light suit almost from what we got in
Yeah,
Prime Two.
it does.
So very interesting.
It kind of looks like Dark Samus's light suit. Like if Dark
Yeah.
Samus had a light suit, that's what they would kind of look like. It does have that. It's like so organic and fleshy looking, but I think also too in the back there are these kind of drawings like the shoulder pads that are not really there. Um, that kind of gives the illusion of it feeling more like a Samus Dark Samus thing. But yeah, it does have that light suit feel to it. I love that. Like that sleek organic like look to it looks so like something about it. It's like really awesome, really sick at the same time. But yeah, I love this artwork, and I really get this. If this was the version of Metroid Prime 2 we got, it would be a scary game. I think like with these like crazy like looking AIs flashing out at you and controlling the ship from here and there, because that seemed to be like what their deal was, like being able to like change the scenarios and screw around with the ship and stuff, but also showing up at you and being all scary, and then having these like crazy Humetroids and Thrash Hunters and whatnot, shock beasts go around. These look pretty scary. I like the idea of like mixing space pirates and using them as like a base form to like mix with other stuff too. That's a cool idea. And just below that, there's a bunch of more paragraphs. We're not going to go into all that, but there's like stuff in there just scrolling how you'd be able to control robots from like a robot control HQ. You'd be able to like gain access to areas otherwise on a table. There was like,
But even that is kind of funny because you kind of do that in AM2R in a certain area of
that's
the game.
true.
So it's funny how that kind of makes its way back, even though Retro obviously didn't end up working on that game.
Right. And then there would also be. So down here, it says that there would be multiplayer in terms of like co op. But here it seems like it confirms that there would be other bounty hunters there, either working with or against Samus. It's kind of just like scrolling through. It seems like the AI might call in other bounty hunters to like come into the ship, right, and either like create chaos or like fight Samus, or I don't know, just be like potentially used by the AI somehow. And it seems like all the bounty hunters could eventually like work together or not. So there might have been some co-op. It seems planned, either co-op or some kind of multiplayer asset here that wasn't necessarily like just straight up like the Echoes multiplayer we got. And then there's other stuff down here too where it was like Space Marines versus giant bugs. Like that was a mode, it seemed like artifact retrieval, more co-op multiplayer, hacking like puzzles and stuff. So maybe there could have been like a co-op version where someone's playing as Samus and someone's like hacking stuff and scanning stuff, kind of like Super Mario Galaxy, where someone's like playing the second person. Artifact retrieval kind of sounds cool. These sound like more fleshed out actual multiplayer modes rather than just co-op, but it seems like they were working with a bunch of ideas for like co-op, for campaign, and for multiplayer, and it seems like some of this eventually like got thrown to the wayside because obviously we never had co-op, but I'm sure some of this eventually worked into what we got into Hunters as well. Like it's interesting how a lot of this definitely influenced Hunters.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that the latter part of all that sounds cool, but the one that stuck out to me, which you can probably guess that I hated, was At a certain point of this adventure, Samus could have the opportunity to create an android double of herself. I'm so glad that that never existed because I think that is just like super cheesy. And you know what it reminds me of is Luigi's Mansion when you create
Oh, Guigi,
Guigi.
yeah.
Yeah. And like that's played for laughs, right? But I mean, I feel like nothing in Metroid necessarily should be played for laughs. And like the experience that you get from playing the game is, the isolation and atmosphere is such a big component of that I'm really glad that they didn't do this. I'm totally not against creating like little mechanisms or bots or something that you can use to help you. But yeah, I think just like a walking Samus robot, it just would have been super cheesy. The rest of this stuff actually sounds like some pretty cool ideas though, and like stuff that if there would have been these modes that went into Metroid Prime Hunters and just like really kind of turned the multiplayer aspect of that game up to 11. I think that could have been really cool, and it's too bad that didn't happen because like I feel like we've talked about Hunters before on the show where like it's the most classical first person shooter esque Metroid Prime game, and I feel like all these modes would have been right at home in that game and really given it some more legs and some more more modes to play and reasons to come back to, and maybe it would have even helped that game's legacy a little bit more because I mean if ever that was the perfect setting for all this stuff with all the different bounty hunters, I think that Prime Hunters was that game.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure if like maybe Hunters would have been made later or on a console, like they could have done a lot of this, but they were probably so limited on what could actually work in the system. Like I don't know how they could have done like Space Marines versus giant bugs, but like there's some stuff in here like the artifact collecting and all the different bounty hunter stuff. Like some of it made it into the game, but not all of it. On the Mecha Samus thing, I agree. I know when we talked about Metroid Prime again, or Metroid Prime 4 again recently, we talked about co-op, and I have no problem with like, I have no problem with two-player co-op and working into the story. I still think you can do like the isolation thing, right? But having like a character that just like Samus makes a mecha Samus, like who essentially just becomes someone to help you through the game, not really about that. A couple things before we move on, which I thought was really interesting though, because it brings you into like the time of when this was being made. If you look right under additional multiplayer goodness, trust and deceit, there's a section there called where it says the bounty hunters start in different sections of the ship and allow them to find each other. This would only work online due to the fact that we cannot stream for different locations at once. Capcom is working on an online Resident Evil for PlayStation 2, which will allow up to 8 players to start at different locations of the game world, and to succeed they need to first find each other. If we decide to support Internet Link, I would really like to see something like this. So something about how they were trying to do like an online game mode there where the players would work together, or even like a battle royale kind of idea, and they were inspired, like motivated by Capcom doing Resident Evil. I thought that was really interesting. And then just below that, they talk about the additional bounty hunters. If they aren't clones of Samus, would need to be memorable and unique. They need their own specific weapons, their own morph ball mode, and something that makes them a likable character. I have no doubt that we can create some cool stuff, but we have to ask ourselves, will this still be a Metroid experience? So even then, it seemed like when they were getting into, which obviously eventually inspired Metroid Prime Hunters because they end up doing it in that game. Like even back then, they're thinking like, will this still be Metroid? And I know you like even feel like, does Metroid Prime Hunters, really a Metroid game, or is it like just a first-person shooter with like a Metroid skin? That's debatable, but I do think that's really interesting how even back then that's something they were cognizant of.
Yeah, I totally agree, and you're right. Like it's a fine line, right, between like what is Metroid and like clinging to what makes the series Metroid, but also embracing the changes that allow it to take the next steps forward. I think that this mode would have been cool, but I mean, I think he kind of summed it up best. Like, is this still a Metroid experience? That's debatable, right? Like, it's tough to say without ever having seen the final product. Like, I think that Metroid Prime Hunters, for me, the multiplayer wasn't the issue so much as the control scheme, which was the issue, which was unfortunately a casualty of just being on the DS. I think that, and we've talked about it before. Like, I think that Prime Hunters had enough of it to, I wouldn't say like, no, this isn't a Metroid game. It's just a first-person shooter with a Samus helmet on. But I do think that that's cool. I think that on the practical side of this as well, Like, so we're probably talking like they're developing these concepts back in 2002 or three, or maybe even earlier. There's just no way that they could have done this on Nintendo's GameCube at that time. They could have probably done it on Xbox Live, which was at the time the most sophisticated online infrastructure. But I mean, like Nintendo was just so far behind that it was laughable, really. The only online Nintendo game that I can even think of off the top of my head was Fantasy Star Online, and I think that was it. So they had these grand ideas, but obviously they didn't get very far because they couldn't get very far because Nintendo was slow on the take for online, and frankly is still slow on the take for online. They've come a long way, but they're not. They're certainly not anywhere near the level of Xbox Live or even PlayStation.
Absolutely. Yeah, this package wouldn't have been possible back then. Nowadays, or even beyond that, or just on an Xbox back then, or sometime after. Yeah, it definitely could have been. It seemed like they were trying to do something where they could create like a ship scenario and reuse a lot of assets from like Prime and like a lot of redundant assets because it's on like a ship, but then like change things up a lot, like change the scenarios, change the environments, like limit Samus here and there, and add all these different features like co-op and multiplayer and all that weren't in Prime to create like a full experience. It might not have been like a full like huge new Metroid game, and it might not have had that feeling of like isolation, which they note again in like the closing comments, but it still feels like something they were like happy to work on it. And again, it seems like we kind of got a little like we got Metroid, like this seems like it's split off into two different games, Metroid Prime 2 and Metroid Prime Hunters. Like they tried to do some of this multiplayer co-op stuff in Hunters and left the rest to Echoes and kind of did that. So I think that's what ended up happening there, and both great games, but I would have loved to have seen how this looks like on its own, right? Like as its own full game. That being said, there is a bunch of concept art below this that gives us an idea of what we might have ran into. It seems like there's some work right at the top there for that must have been some kind of city or like a ship kind of city, or maybe this is inside a ship.
Which is strange because this game is supposed to take place inside of a ship, but it looks like a techno Isengard is what it looks like.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's kind of like a ship that's so huge that it has all these different areas like a city. Like you could see the second picture, there's like a main area and then like bridges to these offshoot areas, which I'm assuming like Samus would travel back and forth from and would take on the AI in these different areas and be cut off from certain stuff. Like again, like the game would kind of force you into certain areas or like force you to take on an area with certain like rules or circumstances as you move about. And there's another ship below that, like the bluer orangey one. That looks really cool. That looks more of like an actual like ship rather than like a city ship kind of thing. I think that looks really dope.
Yeah, it looks very cool.
Yeah.
So getting even below that, like so I guess the primary enemies that Samus would have had to take care of are kind of mechanism or like robotic
robots,
kind
yeah.
of art like enemies here. One of them stands out to me very much so because he looks very much like Gore, but he also looks almost identical to Legion from Mass Effect, and that's the third one down. So that guy sticks out to me. But I think that the first one looks very cool. He's got like a flamethrower and like a kind of like his own version of like the charge shot. It looks like the zero laser almost from Smash Bros.
So like
He looks very
flamethrowers
cool.
coming
I
out of
think,
his head. Looks crazy.
yeah, this dude's got like spikes coming out of his eyeballs. It looks very cool. Lots of cool kind of robotic stuff here. Another one that sticks out to me. This is a couple pictures down here, but there is an enemy that has like faces
Oh yeah.
all around it. It's got faces on faces. It's got faces on its shoulder pads, faces on its knees, faces on its boots. This thing looks bonkers and not Metroidy at all. I don't know. I would have had to see this in practice, but to me, like it's got a face on its crotch. It looks it looks a little bit.
I didn't need
goofy,
to look at. I didn't know that until you said that, man. Yeah, this is again one of the pieces of artwork that I've always seen associated with Metroid Prime 1.5, and yeah, the whole faces thing, like it always stuck out to me. Like, wow, this is so like not Metroid. Like, I guess it would have been right if they released the game. Like, it would have been Metroid because what the game would have been. And I'm assuming that this like form is like one of the final like tangible forms of like the AI, like with all the different personalities. Like maybe like you'd fight like one of the AI as it like fights you using this like weird face robot body thing. I don't know what it is. It's like you could. It's so weird. The face on the crotch, I didn't need to know that, but like the faces all over. It's like the idea is really cool. I love like the head of faces, right? It kind of is like it's so creepy and really just like unnerving. Like it'd be such a different kind of enemy type. Like even the enemies above those, like the robotic ones, kind of have like a space piratey kind of feel, like or just like a robot that I could see being in Metroid. But like this one is just so like out there.
This one is out there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's and yeah, but I would have. This is a again like I would have loved to have played this like horror Metroid game. I think like if we got like a true like scary horror game, like more like Dead Space, that would I think this would probably fit right in.
Yeah, and that one's out there. Underneath, there's a bunch of different concept arts of like I don't even know what these are. Some kind of genetic experiment, alien beings. A lot of them kind of they look like they would fit in with Metroid, but they also kind of strike me as like resembling Twilight Princess or even kind of like a dark Okami for some of them. And there's one guy. He's the second one down and second in from the left. He actually reminds me of the dudes from Federation Force, the
Oh
Space
yeah,
Marines that you play as in a weird kind of way. He's got it's almost like it's got that same kind of chibi style in this
yeah.
particular picture. So that's what I thought of when I saw this.
Oh yeah, I like that guy. He's cool. He seems like a nice enemy. I really am a big
He's a
fan of
good
the
guy.
pig too over to the right, the weird like I don't know, the pig looking one. Yeah, some of these are like robots mixed with some kind of alien, and other ones like there's one on the bottom right with like an actual face, which is
Yeah,
weird to me.
he looks like kind of a boss character more so.
Right, yeah. This is these are like I guess like more common enemies you might run into. But these also kind of feel like they somewhat remind me of Ing a little bit. Like the top left one kind of does, and like
Yeah,
very
yeah.
little, but they kind of give me like an Ing vibe, like their eyes and just the
You
color
can see like the
scheme.
trace DNA of the Ing, I
Right,
think, in these characters here for sure.
for sure. Yeah, these
Well,
are weird
let's.
looking, but the ones below these we scroll down a little more, and these get even more abstract.
These are
These
horrifying.
are yeah,
Yeah.
these are this is the stuff that I've like yeah, like give me this. Like this would scare the absolute crap out of me, man. Like I had to restrain myself there. But this is like the third one down, like or I guess the second one down from the image we were just looking at, like the weird like has like eye wings and like the face with like the praying mantis arms, and then two below that like the crazy skull looking one where it's like all these different mechanical parts like bursting out of this like flat. Oh, it's so creepy looking.
Very, very creepy.
It reminds me of like a Del Toro movie, like Pan's Labyrinth or something. Like that's the vibe I get from these. Like the eye stuff is just really makes it
Yeah.
so creepy. All the focus on so many eyes all over the place, it really stands out to me.
Yeah, I agree. It's actually that's a very apt descriptor because I mean the first one down looks like the Pale Man from Pan's Labyrinth. He's got the
Yeah,
creepy
yeah.
eye thing, big hands. Yeah, you know what? Earlier I was skipping ahead actually, and I was talking about these guys when we were talking about the four and like the child and the killer and
Oh,
stuff
okay,
like
okay.
that. So I'd like all of these images. The one that I maybe don't necessarily love is the kind of the cyber robot guy. He looks very humanoid and not monster esque too much.
Oh, the guy at the
Um,
bottom with like the no
yeah,
eyes with the eye on his big like bald head.
yeah,
Oh, I kind of
and
like
he's
him. He looks
very
cool.
creepy.
He's creepy looking. I don't the face with features, but like no features, kind of like this looks like it looks so experimental. Like someone's like experimenting on like a human or something like that, and like has rebuilt them. I like that design.
Yeah, I like that. I like the kind of idea of it, but I think just he looks less terrifying to me than the other guys, which and it's maybe literally just because he's standing right beside him, and we've just cycled past all these like super creepy guys here. But he stuck out to me as I think I'd want to see something a little bit more terrifying out of him. And then also, right underneath him was kind of the artwork of the child where he looks like a troll that I wasn't super in love with. But underneath him is what I was actually talking about earlier. Like I said, I jumped ahead. So this guy underneath him, he looks like a space pirate mixed with a xenomorph, actually mixed with a little bit of Ridley. Like he looks very, very, very creepy. If this guy and like the rest of these monsters were like stalking you on a ship, man, that would just be this wicked, wicked horror game. Like it, I'm thinking like maybe it could work how like in Resident Evil 2 when Mr. X is chasing you around and like you bump into him in certain places and you run away. I think that could have been like very cool. But yeah, I mean these guys are just like, they're so scary and like very creepy horror bosses. It's wicked to think what could have been if we could have gotten this into Metroid Prime 2 or whatever it would have ended up being.
I don't know. I think some of this even says like it might not like some of this stuff might be unrelated, like and it just kind of got like over the years or like whoever put this together like kind of has associated them. Like obviously the child artwork is very clearly for Metroid Prime 1.5, but some of this stuff may have been like not necessarily for it, but I think it was, and you can see there's certainly like remnants of like Chozo and Ridley in there. It's I some of this stuff is just so un-Metroidy. I feel like that's probably why like they went back to the drawing board,
Yeah,
like
definitely.
100%. Like some of this stuff, and we'll see this when we go to Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. Like some of this stuff does get used in Echoes. Like some of it does like get influencing what happens in that game and in Hunters as well. Like that's certainly confirmed, but a lot of this stuff is so out there and but again really shows like how a game evolves over time. Like we go back to the Metroid Prime content, how it was kind of this like steampunky kind of vibey game before it became the final product, and then we have this where they were just straight up going for this like really horrific game and decided like okay, like we're going to take a little bit of this and mold it into something that maybe is a little less grotesque, a little less this is going to be on the GameCube, right? I'm sure, like, if someone from Nintendo saw this stuff, they'd be like, yeah, like, like, 12-year-olds are buying this, like, 10-year-olds are
Yeah.
buying this. Like, we need to make it, like, it can't be this, like, super scary and crazy. But this kind of game, I mean, some of these designs are so awesome. Like, I would love to, like, it is a shame that some of this is locked into, like, just the artwork and, like, maybe was expanded upon in later games, but otherwise, like, to see it in this form would have been so awesome. I would love, like, a true horror Metroid game based on all this stuff, but we kind of did get a little bit in Echoes. But yeah, these last designs are it for this thread. That was Metroid remake and Metroid Prime 1.5 concept art and the pitch. There's a lot there, and I'm sure we could even go back further and read all of the design document stuff because we did skim over a lot of it.
And we were fools because we were thinking that maybe we could fit all of the rest of this into one episode. But I think that this is going to definitely be a ongoing episode. We still have cut content for Metroid Prime 2, 3, and Hunters to go through. My final takeaway from all of this 1.5 content is like, I think. So there's two main things to me that stand out. A lot of the gameplay stuff that they wanted to do, and a lot of the aesthetic that they wanted to put on this game. To me, a lot of the gameplay, like the seeds or the DNA, kind of was given life in Metroid Prime Hunters. Maybe not to the exact extent that they wanted to, but like I do think that there's a lot of similar concepts. I think that they probably had ideas for what they could do with multiplayer that obviously couldn't be executed the way that they wanted because of technical limitations. But I think that idea like morphed into Metroid Prime Hunters. The aesthetic, I think that we kind of see it here and there in the rest of the Prime trilogy. The Ing are certainly a very creepy species that resembles some of the creature artwork that we saw. You kind of get the aesthetic for some of the bounty hunters in Metroid Prime 3 is somewhat similar to some of the creatures and stuff that we see in here. So like again, I don't think that it's obviously an exact one-to-one, but like I think that the DNA, like the genesis of the idea was created here, and eventually that did kind of seep into these other Metroid games that you can see if you're looking.
Oh, for sure. There's a lot of this leaked into Echoes. I feel like the Hugh Metroid design really influenced like what Dark Samus ended up being. I think the a lot of the enemy types like certainly influenced. I think the Ing were certainly influenced by a lot of this stuff that we saw, and maybe like the A. I don't think like maybe like the AI stuff kind of got worked more into like Metroid Prime 3. I still think that like macabre kind of look to it is it would just be so un-Metroidy, but I would have been interested in seeing like giving like these enemies a more of like an evil and experimented on feel rather than just being like really strong aliens that like are also just creatures that you're fighting, right? And this is where like the game
Yeah,
like
totally.
stuff becomes a little more sinister, which is interesting to me. I would have loved to have seen this fully fleshed out. And yeah, the multiplayer stuff maybe a bit ahead of its time or just undoable on the Nintendo stuff. Um, scrolling through all this work, like the concept work, I did think like, okay, maybe it would be kind of close to how long it took us to go through the Metroid Prime stuff, but there's a lot of meat on these bones, right? Like they did a whole document and like really kind of went into what they wanted this game to look like, and that caught us up a little bit. Just thought it would be artwork, man, but
Yeah, there you go.
there's a lot
Um,
here, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we are definitely going to cover all of the cut content from Metroid Prime 2, 3, and Hunters, and we are going to be back next week with Inspired by Metroid. I still think that nobody is going to predict what game that we're going to be covering, and your first reaction might be that's not a Metroid game or Inspired by Metroid game, but we're going to prove you wrong and show you how next week. In the meantime, any closing thoughts before we get on out of here, Dak?
Closing thoughts. I'm skimming through some of this stuff, and even just the more I skim through it, there's so much more. Like I'm a lot interested in like just how these AIs would fight. Like I really like go through this thread. Everyone, if you have like anything that we should comment on a little more, let us know. But there's a lot of stuff here that like really dig into this. I hope you enjoy it. I'm looking forward to our inspired by Metroid episode. I really don't think anyone's gonna get it, but I think I want to say that we put a hint in one of our previous episodes. Like we definitely
I think we did too.
like there was a riddle in there somewhere that we put in or some kind of joke. I don't know, but
A riddle.
somewhere. Oh come on, man! Someone back then, somewhere in our latest episodes, we had teased it. But anyway, I don't think anyone's gonna get it. If they do, I don't know. I'll send you a cookie or something. But I'm looking forward to that. I can't wait to get back into more of this like cut content stuff. I'm sure we'll revisit it really soon, but we'll take a little break from it after doing these 2 episodes. I hope we get some more Metroid news that isn't job listing soon, but I don't think that's gonna happen. I really hope
No.
Ridley gets buffed tonight. That'd be fantastic. And I'll let you all know my thoughts on where the Metroid characters are in Ultimate after the result of this patch. So yeah, a lot on the table, a lot to still get through, but I'm looking forward to our next episode and getting into finishing that game that we're going to be talking about. I think everyone's going to enjoy it, and I hope everyone's enjoyed our cut content, unmade games series we've got going on here.
Absolutely. Well said. All right, well, that's going to do it for us for this week. We're going to get out of here and go and finish that Inspired by Metroid game, by God. We want you to check us out over on Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Go and like and subscribe. Recommend us to a Metroid fan in your life. Special reminder to everyone, if you want some Metroid swag from the Metroid Database store, use promo code OMEGA. You will get 20% off everything. That's it. That's all. We are out of here. You can check us out over on Twitter at Omega Metroid Pod. I am at Spiteri316. Dak is at DakCity_. Until next week when we finally will be bringing you this Inspired by Metroid game. We'll see you then.
Bye.